Union Chapel, good morning. First of all, I want to let you in on a little secret, and that is that I know we call these services live streamed services, but many of you have probably figured out by now that these services are actually recorded in advance, and we kind of simulate a live service on Sunday mornings, and we've decided to do this for kind of the communal aspect of being able to kind of attend a service together. So, cat's out of the bag, in case you didn't know. Now you know. Um, I'm bringing this up though, kind of preempting our service with this because we record these services on Thursdays, sometimes on Fridays, which gives us some time to edit, to mix the worship set, to have it ready for Sunday. But it also creates a really strange dynamic, and that is that a lot can happen in 3 days. So why am I recording this on a Saturday night? I'm telling you now that it's late on Saturday night, and I'm adding this to what's already a little bit of a long service. So just hang with me for a second. I'm doing this because I've just felt unsettled this week. The events of the week uh, have been really heavy. Displays of police brutality, white supremacy, the mixture of that with the protesting that we've seen kind of all the way across our country, even our own kind of city as well. The rioting, the pleading, the tears have just left me really grieved and saddened and with a really heavy heart. Um, but those events have also left me feeling really unsure of how to speak to our community. And I realized tonight that if our service was played tomorrow, just as it was, that I wouldn't feel settled about it. The current events are mentioned in our prayers of the people, and they're kind of alluded to in our message, but they're just not directly addressed. And so I really felt like it was appropriate to do that. Um, it's important for us to think about these things biblically and think about them in light of what we feel like God's called us to be here in this place. Our message this week is about peace as the fruit of the Spirit, peace which means shalom, wholeness, and I think we're really keenly aware right now of the absence of peace and wholeness. The conviction that I want to speak now is that I believe we have to become a community that refuses to accept the white comfort that we've inherited in many ways, and instead chooses to follow Christ, to pick up our crosses, to die to ourselves, to die to our privilege, and to seek reconciliation, to seek that shalom and carry that reconciliation work that Jesus has called us to forward. But in all honesty, most of the time I just feel really ill-equipped to speak about this, let alone lead a community in regards to this conversation. So sometimes it can be paralyzing, and social media is entirely frustrating to me as an individual and as a leader, and just feels like unhelpful. I know it can be helpful, but much of the time it's just very frustrating. So some of what I'm learning and some of what I want to encourage you with this morning is that we need to be listeners and we need to be learners. And I know I'm not the only one saying this, the only one pointing this out. One of the grounding stories for our church is the story of the Good Samaritan. And it's a story where the person we must learn from is the marginalized minority outsider, right? Jesus tells a story where the listener is forced to accept a lesson in love from that person. And we want to be a community that can do this. And let's be honest for a minute. It's okay just to name it, that we are a community of primarily white people. And so that means we have to grow in choosing to learn from outside the confines of white voices, which can be a very difficult muscle to exercise, right? It forces us out of our whiteness, and it often causes us to be stretched and challenged in really uncomfortable ways. To be able to listen, you have to have done some work in your own soul to begin with, and the message addresses that this morning. I hope that will encourage you. But I really do think we have to begin to listen to those who have lived and experienced what it's like to live in a black body in America. So two just quick resources. This is by far not a fix-all in any way, but just two resources that have been meaningful to me recently. The first is a book by Ta-Nehisi Coates called Between the World and Me. It's a short book written by a black man who's writing really a letter to his son. And that book deeply affected the way that I see life for people of color living in America. The second book is one that I just finished today. In fact, yesterday somebody in our congregation recommended a book by Austin Channing Brown. I downloaded it yesterday, finished it this afternoon. It's called I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Full of Whiteness. And I obviously devoured it. It's also short. It's written by a believing black woman. And I finished it with a very similar feeling that someone had given me a window into a world and a life that I just could never understand unless somebody was willing to open up that part of their life and let me learn from it. So that's what I'm learning. I'm learning that listening is really important at this point, and that when I really listen, I begin to see places in me that are dislocated and displaced still, even with the Spirit of Christ living in me. And that's really our hope, right? That the Spirit opens us up to the truth of our lives and helps us see those places. And really that it has to begin in us. The Spirit has to create peace in us so that we can be people of peace in the world. My encouragement to you is to get outside of your comfort zone, to take a lesson in love from somebody who's different from you. And that for every word that we speak, there would be thousands, 10,000, 100,000 words we've listened to first. I realize that listening isn't a cure-all, right? That God calls us to be people of action, people of justice. And my hope is that the way forward will become clear for us in regards to that as well. Ways that we can put our lives into action in regards to reconciliation in and around this for our community. But I think listening is a really great place to start. We want to resource you even more than this, and so maybe be looking this week for some more resources we'll be sharing through social media. Thanks for letting me just speak off the cuff here for a minute and preempt the service. My hope is that this time together of worship and of diving into God's Word and discussing these realities will be an encouragement and a strength to you, and that the peace of Christ would dwell in you richly.
God, our peace, when chaos swirls, restore us by the breath of your Spirit, for some of us are wilted and weary. Some of us are anxious for restoration and wonder if it will happen at all. Hear our voices crying out amidst the noise, where we hide to wait for a new day. Let us not be bound to the earth by our weariness and tears, but rather lifted up by the wonder of your life within us. Revive us, O Lord. There is praise to give and work to be done and life to nurture. No matter our tired bones, you are not finished with us. By your goodness and grace, may we not be finished. We ask in the name of our God, the Creator, of Jesus, the Christ, and the Holy Spirit, our breath of life. Union Chapel, come and worship.
Oh, how high would I climb mountains if the mountains were where you hide? Oh, how far I'd scale the valley if you grace the other side. And oh, how long have I chased rivers from lonely seas to where they rise against the rush of grace descending from the source of its supply. 'Cause in the highlands and the heartache, you're neither more or less inclined. And I could search and stop at nothing. You're just not that hard to find. So I will praise you on the mountains. I will praise you who like a lamb was slain for me. So I would praise you on the mountains, I would praise you when the mountains in my way. You're the song where my feet are. So I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the summer where my feet are. In the highlands, in the heartache, all the same. Oh, oh. Wherever I run to, wherever I am, your name can move mountains. Wherever I stand, if ever I walk through the valley of death, I'll sing into the shadows my song of ascent. Wherever I walk, wherever I am, your name can move mountains. Wherever I stand, and if ever I walk through the valley of death, I'll sing through the shadows my song of ascent, my song of ascent. Oh, oh. From the gravest of all valleys come the pastures we call grace, a mighty river flowing upwards from a deep but empty grave. So I will praise you on the mountain, I will praise you when the mountain's in my way. You're the song where my feet are. So I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands and the heartache all the same.
Union Chapel, I want to invite you to join me in this prayer of confession. Father, we confess to you an unruly tongue, an irritable nature, an unwillingness to bear the burdens of others and share their sorrows, a friendly face that masks a cold heart. We ask for your forgiveness. Give us what we cannot attain on our own. Come shape us by your Spirit, that our lives would reflect the beauty of who you are. Let's take a moment for quiet confession. And now hear these words of assurance. The mercy of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting. May the God of mercy, who forgives us all our sins, strengthen us in all goodness, that we might move in step with him. Receive and rejoice in the forgiveness of God.
fill me, wash me, Savior, for I die.
Union Chapel, please join me in the prayers of the people. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we are here this morning because in our hearts there is a deep thirst for connection, a need to belong, to be held, to be known, valued, and loved. We are here because we believe that you welcome us, hold us, know, value, and love us. We trust that in you is an unquenchable fountain of goodness. We draw near in hope of receiving not just a drop, but a drenching of your refreshing stream. Spirit, you know no bounds. Come to us now in all our locked rooms and fill us till the cup of our souls runs over. Creator God, thank you for your goodness as we've experienced it this week. We are grateful for the many ways you care and provide for us. Specifically, we rejoice with Haley Hutchin and Scott Becker, who were both hired to new jobs this week, even in the midst of this pandemic. We know this is a gift from your hand. Thank you for rainy days followed by sun, for the beauty of spring unfolding all around us, for vegetable gardens to fill our hearts with courage, even as the future remains uncertain. Thank you for friends and family who care for us emotionally with a text or a Zoom call, an errand run, or a loaf of bread dropped on our doorstep. As your image bearers, we affirm our hope in you as we seek to fill the voids of this season with whatever good our hands might find to do. Jesus, you began the work of new creation when you walked this earth and went about healing every kind of disease and sickness. You continue this work in partnership with healthcare providers today. We ask on behalf of our sisters Jen Olney and Joey Mosebrucker for the renewal and healing of their bodies. Guide and direct those who will be operating soon on Jen. Give courage to her heart and provide for Jen, Brett, and Max during this longer recovery and the financial burden that comes with it. Day by day, give strength to Joey as she heals post-operatively. Help Adam, Bernice, and Clark as they nurse her back to health. Spirit, in times of stress, you reveal the cracks in our foundations. Even when we ought to be pulling together, injustice and inequalities continue to thrive. We grieve with our brothers and sisters of color for the lives that have been recently cut off by violence, their names barely making the news. We speak them here: Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd, because they are your valued sons and daughter. We also ask on behalf of those communities disproportionately impacted by COVID, the Navajo Nation, African and Latino Americans, that we would find better ways to care for one another. As these realities become so acutely visible, let us not be hindered by shame or defensiveness, but roll up our sleeves and get to work helping create good with these communities. In times like these, we thank you for the opportunity to put off the false and look for the deeper, energizing reality of your Spirit within us. We want to bear the fruit that only you can produce in us: love, joy, and peace. Root us in your love, surprise us with your joy, enfold us with your peace, that we might become infectious with these life-giving qualities to one another and to the world. That is our desire as we draw near to you now. Father, in your mercy, hear our prayer.
So good.
How's that?
Yeah.
That's pretty good. What's up, Union Chapel? It's keeping you on your toes again. So dumb. Hope you're doing well. Before we jump in and get started, a couple of things, reminders every week. First of all, thanks for joining us on this live stream. Glad that you're here. If you're new or visiting, or if you haven't said hello to us yet in the chat column, we'd encourage you to say hi, let us know that you're here, let other people greet you. And then also just a quick reminder that if any time in this service you'd like to speak with a staff member or somebody on our elder team, you can click on that live prayer button and that'll connect you in a private conversation with somebody from our staff or leadership team. They'd love to pray with you or help with questions, concerns, connect with you in any way. So would encourage you to make use of that. That's what it's there for. So don't be afraid of clicking on that button if you want to. Obviously changing it up a little bit this week. Jenny Seitz is in the house joining me this morning for a conversation. Jenny is on staff at Union Chapel, if you didn't know. Shame on you because she's been... No, maybe that's too harsh. But if you didn't know, Jenny has been on staff in a variety of roles, really for the last decade.
Lots of hats.
For our church. And lots of different hats, children's ministry director, and she is now the director of our counseling ministry. So what does that mean? Do you want to explain a little bit what that means, Jenny?
Sure. So I am available, I'm just part-time on staff, but I also have a private practice outside of this facility. And what I offer here for Union Chapel is non-clinical counseling, so more of a pastoral or care role, and I'm available to meet with individuals and families and talk through places that they might feel stuck or might want just a little bit of extra prayer and care, offer referrals. There's some excellent practitioners here in the Portland, Vancouver area that I have connections with, and do kind of multiple things that way. I also just kind of help provide a trauma-informed lens for pastoral conversations that are going on. Any kind of mental health things that might be coming up, we have that available. So
so I would encourage you to make use of Jenny if there is a way that you could kind of see yourself reaching out to her to help you with some of those things. She's a great resource to our staff, but really we want her to be a resource to our entire community. As well. So I invited her in just because I thought it would be fascinating to have a conversation. This week we're focusing on the fruit of the Spirit that is peace. And I thought it'd be fascinating for us to have a conversation kind of through the lens both of kind of a theological lens and a therapeutic lens. And how do we look at peace as a fruit of the Spirit? I know for me, oftentimes I think about the opposites of these fruits of the Spirit when I'm thinking about them. Last week we were talking about joy, and I kind of talked a little bit about despair being the opposite of joy. And so in relationship to this week, my thought was peace. Well, definitely anxiety really is one of the first things that comes to my mind when I'm thinking about peace, and really going, man, I'd love to have a conversation around those things. Peace, anxiety, theology, kind of a therapeutic lens, scientific lens as well. So that's what I'm excited about doing. I think it's incredibly pertinent as well because this is just a season, right? You don't even have to say much more than that. It's just a season of anxiety for everyone, for even people who would not be able to necessarily look at it and point to it in their regular life, maybe are paying more attention and going like, oh, this is affecting me in ways that I didn't think it would. And a lot of that's the uncertainty, right, of a global pandemic, the invisible virus living in, like, how does that not strike fear into your heart or some level of uncertainty? The economic realities, recession, hardship, we got kind of all of these forces that are kind of pressing in on us. The anxiety of home life, of being kind of in and on top of each other for 11 weeks now. And then, so I think there's that layer. Then I think even in this last week, right, we've seen the conversation even get larger and broader as these realities of unrest around racial injustice that's so pervasive in American culture as well. And then we have a political climate that just fuels that fire rather than working in any way to try and address our anxiety or help bring peace or move towards peace. It actually is like doing the opposite. And so it just feels like it's a very difficult season, you know. Even around the pandemic stuff, we started out with like this, like hurrah, of like we're all in this together, and then very quickly it just dissolved into this very kind of hardened, anxious space. So it just feels like, man, this is a good time. This is a good time for a conversation around peace and anxiety. I was reading an article last week that was talking about how even in this season, like the Calm app on the app store is like one of the most downloaded apps of the season, which is just like a meditation, and like people are realizing the anxiety that's going on in them, and they are trying to address it in some way. So how do we look at this biblically and therapeutically, and look at the beautiful ways in which those things integrate together, and how do we kind of move forward in this season?
So starting out the conversation, Adam, I think it might be helpful for you to kind of set the stage and just give me and us a framework for the biblical understanding of peace. When we look at the Word of God, we're talking about the fruits of the Spirit. How would you define peace?
Yeah, so I mean, without getting into specific stories or exegeting a passage, I think the place my mind goes to is just the definition of peace and the words that are used in the biblical text and in the biblical history as well, the words that are used to kind of describe it. So the first would be the one we see in the New Testament is the Greek word eirene, which really just is describing peace between individuals, nations, this idea of like between two entities. I think the helpful part of this word is that it's rooted in a verb, the verb eiro, which means to join. So it's this idea of kind of connectedness, that in peace there's a harmony or connectedness between two things or between multiple things. Then certainly also looming large in that New Testament world is kind of the Roman understanding of peace, right? And the Latin word for peace is pax, which you may remember from school history lessons. Pax Romana was this idea that Rome was coming and bringing peace throughout the world, but it was a very different kind of peace, right? Because it was a peace that came at the hands of violence or the threat of violence that created peace, and it was very temporal, obviously, and very mixed with violence in at the same time. I think the most helpful kind of biblical understanding of peace, though, does come from shalom, which I know we've talked about as a church quite a bit. But shalom is the Hebrew word for peace, and it implies something much broader than just like the ceasing of striving or of strife, the ceasing of war or hostility. It's a word that is more about wholeness, completeness, soundness. Could include everything from health and wellness and safety and prosperity, and it has an implication of permanence. So it's not this kind of temporary thing. And I think the best way to describe shalom is just to say the way it ought to be. Right? This is the way God intended and the way things ought to be as a whole. And so I think that's where I would leave that kind of, at least in a general sense. I know we'll get kind of down to it a little bit more, but kind of when we're looking at most of the time when peace is being talked about in scriptures, it's more of a shalom-like peace, right? A wholeness, a connectedness to God, to each other, to creation, and kind of that harmony that exists in that space. So, so Jenny, I think where I'd like to take the conversation, or what the place that I'm really interested in bringing your voice in is around the idea of, in the clinical work that you do, maybe you can help us by describing how you understand anxiety and how anxiety works in our minds, in our bodies, some of the science behind that, and then also, like, kind of on the flip side, what does peace and calm look like in that kind of clinical understanding and sense as well? What's it doing in our minds and bodies?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you landed on the connectedness piece of shalom, because that's kind of, anxiety would honestly be the opposite. So if I was to define anxiety, I would define that as a feeling of worry or nervousness, unease, kind of a future-oriented disquiet. Often it's around a narrative that we're creating, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But I do think it's important to say, kind of starting the conversation out though, while we're talking, Adam, I want to make sure that our audience knows that I'm not going to be giving advice or counsel about generalized anxiety disorder or other mental health diagnoses. They're really prevalent in our society, and those diagnoses deserve the attention of a specific medical professional. So absolutely, I'll be happy to offer referrals out if any of this seems to kind of activate that in anyone that's watching this. Feel free to reach out. But discussing what anxiety is and how it plays out at kind of a general level. So anxiety can have positive effects or negative effects, right? Like, we need a little bit of anxiety to move us towards something, to motivate us. A little bit can help us accomplish things that need to be accomplished. We have deadlines. A little bit of anxiety.
Get my taxes done.
Totally, a little bit. Do you though? Do you?
Let's not talk about that. They extended that.
A little bit of anxiety pushes us towards that April or July deadline. A lot of anxiety reaches in and does a very different thing. So when anxiety is a negative force in our lives, the story that we're focusing on becomes maladaptive, right?
That's a big word.
It is, yes.
I mean, I know I've used it.
Yes, maladaptive.
Pretending like I knew what it meant. Maybe you can tell us what that means. So
not helpful is really what maladaptive means. Mal is not or bad. Adaptive, just it's not going to be a helpful tool anymore. So when anxiety is too big, it starts to be not helpful anymore. It starts to shut down centers of our brain, really going from those kind of full integrated was a word that you'd use, that connectedness between all the centers of our brain, and really focuses it down just into our survival centers, our fight, flight, freeze. And that can be helpful.
Don't they kind of call that like your animal brain or your like alligator brain or something like that?
Mammalian, reptilian, not mammalian, reptilian brain. Yeah, that's kind of what, just that instinctive center is really what that's talking about. I think, and we read this book as a staff, Peter Steinke, we've read some of his stuff together. He has a really helpful way of defining anxiety. Looking at two different effects that anxiety has, a repressive effect and an infectious effect, and we'll detail that out a little bit. But looking at where anxiety comes from, it's another Greek word, ananke, I think is how you would say it. I don't really know, but that word and name was the name of the Greek god of slavery, and that word itself, ananke, literally means throat or to press together. So the image that it creates is one of slavery, that Greek god of slavery that yokes
like having
you.
A collar, yeah.
Exactly. Yep. Pushes, constricts, enslaves, really drives you to that. So the rest of that family of words does a really good job of illustrating what anxiety does in our bodies. So tightening, a narrowing, a suffocating. It really restrains creative behavior and decreases our capacity to learn, and really looks to replace curiosity with a demand for certainty. It stiffens our position against someone else's. It interrupts our concentration. It floods our nervous system, contributes to that kind of yes or no thinking, rigidity. Really, gridlock is what anxiety locks us into. on the opposite side of that, or not opposite, similarly, like the infectious effects, say that 10 times, anxiety is contagious as well. So in my line of work, Dr. Bowen looks at family systems, right? And he looks at how anxiety plays into systems or large groups. He talks about acute anxiety, which is kind of rooted in a moment of time, momentary, and then chronic, which is more pervasive. Just like you were referring to COVID being kind of that infectious, that's what this is. It's an invisible, infectious force. It's a kind of a contagion. It's not just focused on a specific threat, but it gathers groups around kind of generalized spaces and ties them in anxiety narratives where there's little capacity for reflection and observation and creative thinking. Anxiety is literally disconnection in our bodies and in our minds and in our brains.
It's fascinating to kind of go from that, like it's disconnecting your brain from like the helpful creative reasoning centers and puts you into a more instinctual place, but then also that it has that communal effect as well. As it spreads from one to another, it has that way of cordoning you off from those same places where that would happen.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, in a relational sense.
Yeah, and peace and calm kind of does the opposite. So I'll talk about calm for a moment. So calm and peace opens up those creative centers in our brains, right? It allows the frontal lobe to come online. That's our thinking, our reasoning centers. It allows integration of the left brain language and the right brain kind of emotive centers. That's oftentimes what I do with clients in a therapeutic setting, is try to create calm in their bodies so that those creative centers can be opened up. And we do that in a couple of ways. When we go into that kind of reptilian portion of our brain, we look at conserving our resources. And two of our resources that our body runs on are water and air, right? Those are both vital to living. So part of creating calm in our bodies is telling our bodies that we have enough, we have ample, we have enough water, we have enough air. So if a client has a water bottle with them, I'll have them, kind of sit back, take a sip, hold it in their mouths, tell their body, okay, we're okay. We have enough water in our system right now. Dry mouth is something we often experience when we're nervous, right? We get up for public speaking and we have dry mouth. I'm noticing I'm having that right now. And yes, cheers, right? So when we have water in our systems, it calms down those centers of our brains. Similarly with air, deep breathing is a really commonly used practice to slow our heart rates, to tell our bodies, we're okay, we have enough air, we can take deep breaths. So I'll do that with clients. We'll do deep breathing exercises. We'll move towards that.
Yeah, having a 5-year-old in my house is like every day. But at a very real level too, of going like, we're not gonna get anywhere. Because that's exactly what it does, is that tightening, constricting, like you're not gonna be able to get a word out. We're not going to be able to have a conversation, right, until we just can breathe and settle a little bit here. And so there's a lot of that going on in my house.
Absolutely. Yep, that's what I talk about. It's that sympathetic portion of the nervous system that prepares your body for kind of that fight, flight, freeze, potential danger, and the parasympathetic portion that restores that calm and composed state. So talking about kind of calm in a therapeutic sense, Adam, I would love to tie that to kind of a theological, biblical understanding of creating that peace and calm. What would you say as you look at the biblical narrative?
Where we find that, where we access that. So my mind kind of goes to two places in the story. I think it's hard to talk about peace in the biblical story without, and shalom, without thinking of creation, right? Yeah. That God creates the world we think of the fabric interconnectedness of shalom, right? So it's humanity is in right relationship with itself, is working in creation to cultivate, and Adam and Eve are doing what God intended for them. Everything's firing on all cylinders, right? Everything's working. The relationship to God is there. The relationship to creation, all of those things are harmonized and are working, right? And that's right. We see that beautiful connectedness of shalom. Then what's really fascinating is, that doesn't last very long. We know that, right? Yeah. Genesis chapter 3, we see the serpent kind of enter in, and it's really fascinating as I think about it in light of what you were talking about, and in light of your definition of anxiety, right? Which is to create unease about a future possibility, right?
Yeah.
Some kind of fear or negative thought about what might happen. That's exactly what the serpent plants in and amongst them. He doesn't come in with other facts, right? He doesn't come in and say, God's not good. He doesn't come in and say, don't follow God, follow me. He's not doing any of that. It's much more sneaky and subversive, and that's where we see the pervasiveness of anxiety. He comes in and he says, did God really say? Right? Which is just, does he actually care about you? It's just a question, right? Which is this little seed of anxiety, which then leads them to question that narrative, right? Yeah. Maybe God's not good. Maybe he doesn't have what's best for me. Maybe I need to take what is not mine. Maybe I need to control. Maybe I need to be the one in charge here, right? Yeah. So much anxiety. And then kind of like, so I think you're seeing both the repressive and the infectious nature of it as well, as then that spreads, right? So then in a moment, in that chapter, all of a sudden it's chaos everywhere, right? It's the infectious nature of it has gone everywhere. So it's broken relationship between Adam and Eve as they are blaming each other. It's broken their relationship to their own selves and their own bodies as they're experiencing shame and covering themselves. It's broken the relationship with God as they're hiding behind the bushes. Yeah. And it's broken their relationship with creation. They're going to toil and work against, in many ways going to have to work against now this kind of brokenness. And so the shalom is literally just shattered, right? It's just the fabric has been torn at all of those connecting points, and you see it so clearly. And then all of history is just that on repeat. It's what we're experiencing in our lives. It's what we're seeing in our world, is the tearing of that fabric of shalom. The way that it ought to be isn't there. Yeah. And so I think that's where I see a lot of that initial overlap. But then I also the other large part of the narrative, and this is skipping ahead quite a ways, is to go, okay, so then what is Jesus's relationship to peace, and what is Jesus doing with peace and shalom? And I think the place where my mind goes to, and we were in the same spot in Easter, of on the night of the resurrection, Jesus shows up in the midst of their fear and anxiety in their dark room where they've locked the doors, right, out of fear for the Jews. Jesus shows up in the middle of that space, and the word that he speaks to them is peace, which is, I am pulling all things back together. Yeah. And through my death and resurrection, I'm actually healing and reconciling these parts, these things that have been messed with. And I think Paul puts it beautifully in Colossians chapter 1, in his little poem at the beginning of Colossians. He says, speaking about Jesus, he's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So Paul's reiterating, this is the creator God. Jesus is the image of the creator God who made things in the way that they're supposed to be, right? And then he's the head of the body, the church. He's the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. And this is where I think Paul really nails it on the head. And through him, to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. Yeah. Right? So I also love the way that Eugene Peterson puts this, and I know I do this a lot, but he puts such great language to it. He says, so spacious is God, so roomy, that everything of God finds its proper place in him without crowding. And not only that, but all the broken and dislocated pieces of the universe, people and things, animals and atoms, get properly fixed together in vibrant harmonies, all because of his death, his blood that poured down from the cross. So if at at the fall, we see this tearing of shalom. What Paul is saying is at the cross, we see Jesus repairing the shalom. He's taking all the broken and dislocated pieces of the universe, literally at an atomic level, at a spiritual level, and in all of us, he's drawing us back into that wholeness, right? Repairing relationship between humanity and God, between humanity and self, between humanity and creation. Like that's the work that he's doing. So I think when we're talking about peace, and this is a helpful differentiation, right, is to say peace is different than calm, right? Like calm is kind of that superficial, and it's helpful. Calm is really good because it helps open us up to experience different things, but peace is so much more whole than that, right? Yeah. It's more than just finding a calm space. And even in relation to this week, I think at times we can find ourselves wanting calm and not actually being people who want peace, right? Because peace is restorative. So in relation to the racial injustice, right, as I have to kind of check my own self, my own white privilege in regards to how I can feel about these things, even as a pastor, as a sense of like, man, can we just get back to a place of calm where this all just kind of dies down again and we can go back to living our lives undisturbed, right? And I realize that's that's a terrible and selfish thought, but that's the difference between wanting calm and then saying, no, what I actually want is peace. Like something here is broken, and what I want to see is God actually come in and heal that, right? And so I think that happens at an individual level as well, and I think that's where I want to turn the conversation a little bit, is towards that practical. So Jenny, how do we participate with God, right? So if Paul's saying, now you have the life of the Spirit in you, right? The life of the Spirit is there energizing in you, but you can still choose flesh versus choose spirit. And he's saying walk in step with the Spirit, which implies this continual repetitive action. He's saying walk in step with the Spirit. And so in regards to peace and calm, how do we find our way forward in regards to some of that? How do we wrap our minds around some of those practical realities of living in peace?
Yeah. No, I like how you talked about the difference between peace and calm, and peace, not necessarily being sourced in our biology per se.
But sourced in Jesus.
Yes, but participated in. So I'll try to make this quick because I don't want to keep everybody around all day.
I'm the long-winded one here, so you're doing fine.
So when I look at how to participate in that, there's been a lot of research in the therapeutic field around this. Brené Brown does great work. Dr. Brackett does great. There's a lot of resources, but they kind of narrow it down to some commonalities. So that's where I'll focus. I would say recognizing, labeling, and managing are going to be three of the ways that we really start to participate in this, right? So recognizing being the first step. We're going to pay attention to our body and our brain. The language of our bodies is sensation, right? So it's telling us information. When we feel butterflies in our stomach, that's our gut communicating with our brain. There's something going on here. When we feel our throat constricting or our mouths getting dry, that's the language of our body. So recognizing that, paying attention, what's happening? What am I feeling? Then labeling. I, like many of my colleagues, have a feelings wheel out on my table between me and my clients a lot of times, and they can pick that up and find language for what's going on. That labeling piece connects, that integrative, like you were talking about, that fabric, again, left brain, right brain, putting words to what's going on in that right brain, really attaching feelings, words to it once we recognize it, and then managing it would be kind of the final step. Begin to assess what narratives are coming up for us, what, with that future-oriented narrative that's going on, really start to assess that, observe our thoughts, not as fact, but in an evaluative way. And that's a really difficult practice that takes a lot of time to learn, but just our emotions and our feelings not being landed on as fact, but being able to step back in the moment and evaluate them and then make decisions around it. Really,
I've heard some language around that of one of the books that I return to and read has one of these kind of axioms that says everything is invented, right? And the idea that all of our narratives are exactly that. They're invented by us. They're environments and stories that we've created and crafted.
Yep.
So you're saying it's just part of working through this is just putting some language to this is the narrative I've created?
Absolutely. Yep, there's healing that happens in that. That's why I talk a lot about, and I know we do this on Sundays as well, developing practices, mindfulness practices. You know, I also talk a lot with my clients about things fester in the dark, right? Monsters are made in the dark. The monster under the bed, the monster in the closet. And the Holy Spirit allows light in, like shines truth into those places. And so when we can slow down, look at those narratives that we've created, ask for the Holy Spirit to illuminate what's really going on there, then those monsters shrink down. They become dust bunnies rather than big hairy monsters, right?
Yeah, I love in some of my favorite prayer practices start out with that becoming aware of God's presence, right? And then specifically asking the Holy Spirit to show us the truth of my life, or show me the truth of my life, which is this idea that even acknowledging like maybe I don't know the truth of my life, like I haven't paid attention to those narratives, right? I've been treating it like it's fact, but it's actually kind of something I've invented in my own soul, right? And the Spirit kind of grabs me by the hand with a flashlight is kind of the image that I have and says, let's go looking, let's go shine a light on this thing that you've created in your mind and show it for what it is. And so I think that's really helpful. I see so much overlap in terms of the scriptures here with what you're talking about with recognize, label, manage. So like this is like the Psalms over and over and again, you know, where at some point the psalmist has realized they're feeling a certain way, and even the psalm itself is their labeling, right? It's them putting words to this is what I recognized and saw in myself, and you see it come out in their lament. You see it come out in you know, really strong raw language like, God, why have you abandoned me? Or why are you so far off? Or why do the wicked prosper when it seems like you're not paying attention to me? And so it's this really brutal, like kind of recognizing, labeling, right? But then almost always, I think save for one in the entire scriptures, there is this kind of this turning the corner at the end of kind of choosing a different narrative, right? Saying like, this is how I feel right now. I feel abandoned by you, but I'm going to choose this narrative of, but you, oh God, are faithful, or you, God, are strong, or your love is steadfast, or you're good to all generations, right? There's a clinging to something that's kind of deeper there. And so even, I think we see this beautifully played out in the scriptures. That's kind of in the Old Testament. Then I also think in the New Testament, my mind goes to Philippians 4 and Paul saying, he's exhorting the church in Philippi saying, don't be anxious, right? He's saying, don't be anxious about anything, but in everything through prayer and supplication, thanksgiving, make your requests made known to God. So he's saying, don't live in this anxious place. Instead, make it known to God, express that, label it, give it, and express it back to God. And this is what prayer is. Like, we think of prayer as like asking God for the things we want, but so much more of our prayer life would flourish if we take the opportunity for it to just be this, right? To pay attention to our own souls and to say, God, this is what I'm thinking and feeling, and to express it to Him. This is what Paul is saying to do. And then it's beautiful because he says, make your requests made known to God. And then what happens? And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Again, Eugene Peterson does this really well, putting it into just slightly different language. He says, let petitions and praises shape your worries into prayers, right? letting God know your concerns. And before you know it, a sense of God's wholeness, right? There's that word again. Everything coming together for good will come and settle you down. It's wonderful what happens when Christ displaces worry at the center of your life, right? So I love this picture that they're both giving us permission to acknowledge. And and this is really key, and I think maybe where we'll kind of try and wrap it up a little bit here, is the idea that we want to be peacemakers in the world, right? Especially when we have a week like we've had, we want to be people who go and do peace. But I think so much of what we see in the scripture over and over again is that, and in Jesus in the way that he approaches people, is an understanding that, you know, even seeing peace as that infectious thing. And so how are we going to affect our surroundings with peace? How can I be the non-anxious presence of Christ to somebody else if the non-anxious presence of Christ isn't here to begin with? Right? So like these, it's not just pitting contemplative practice against activism, right? They always go together. The best contemplatives were activists at the same time, and that's because they understood at their heart, like, God's got to transform something in me if I'm going to be a person of peace. So when we're thinking about this as a community, we can be drawn to those realities of like, I want to go and do. And I think it's this helpful reminder of like, nah, we got to start here and deal with these issues and things going on in us. Again, talking so much. My goodness, I'm sorry. So maybe Jenny, wrap it up for us. Where would you, or what would your hope and your desire be for our community as a part of this conversation that they kind of walk away with? What are you hoping that they walk away with, I think, as some takeaways?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, going back to my work, Dr. Siegel is one that I love, and he has a phrase that he says, you have to feel it to heal it. So just exactly what you said, starting with ourselves, kind of bringing that recognizing, labeling, managing in ourselves, and then just as anxiety and just as, you know, COVID is infectious, so is calm and peace, just like you said. It permeates. Once we can manage it, then we can pass it on. I noticed myself, even as you were reading those scriptures, taking deep breaths, right? Like they're the word of God. Yeah, it settles and it grounds. And so that would be my hope, that as our community motto is to be the non-anxious presence to each other and to our community and to the world, that would be my hope, that we wouldn't just be peacekeepers, you know, kind of on that defensive posture, but we'd be peacemakers and really that open-handed, passing that peace on, that we are peaceful at a soul level, that we would check in with ourselves with that recognizing, labeling, managing, and then we would be in prayer and relationship with God that would allow that to permeate and pass on.
Thanks for jumping in on the conversation. I know one of the things that both Jenny and I wish we had more time to do this morning was to kind of resource you with some things, and I think we'll work this week to kind of pick out and choose a couple things that we feel like we'd love to pass on. So I'd say be sure to keep your eyes peeled on social media and our website and our email and stuff for some of that information, resourcing you a little bit better. As we turn now to the tables that we have set in front of us, right? I want to kind of shift towards the bread and the wine. This really is this is really kind of ground zero of peace for us, right? This is the reminder of Jesus earning, making, restoring, creating peace. You know, this new, it's the epicenter of new creation for us, right? Is the death of Christ, his the peace that he made on the cross, the pouring out of his blood. And so it's the place that we come back to for reset. We talk about that continual renewed action of walking with the Spirit. And so this is this continual action as well here at this table as we come back to this place and we receive God's strength, his forgiveness. We receive his peace in our very souls. And so may this table be a place of peace for you to both receive and then to go from this table. And even if your going is no farther than your four walls, may it be a space in which peace permeates. I think that's the blessing that we long for you. May peace permeate your life, your family, your community, our community and world. I want to leave you with the prayer of St. Francis, which I feel like just wraps up a lot of what we've been saying here. So would you pray with me? Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there's hatred, let us sow love. Where there's injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there's despair, hope. Where there's darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. God, grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, and it's in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it's in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
You weary heart, now to Jesus. Come, you anxious soul, now see. There is perfect love and comfort in
light in my darkness, peace for my soul. You are my rescue. You never let go. And all my hope is in you. All my strength is in you. With every breath, my soul will rest in you. Here in my weakness, you're always the same. Your love is my shelter. Your life is my way. All my hope is in you. And all my hope is in you. All my strength is in you. With every breath, my soul will rest in you. All my hope is in you. And all my hope is in you. All my strength is in you. With every breath, my soul will rest in you. Sing together, constant Savior. Constant Savior, friend forever. Lord, you have my heart. Sure foundation, never failing. Sure foundation, never failing. Lord, you have my heart. And all my hope is in you. All my strength is in you. With every breath, my soul will rest in you. With every breath, with every breath, my soul will rest in you. With every breath, my soul will rest in you. Jesus. friend forever.
And so, Union Chapel, I invite you to open your hands and receive these words of blessing from a God who loves you. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not let them be afraid. Do not let your hearts be troubled, for I am with you to the very end of the age. Do not let your hearts be troubled. My strength is made perfect in weakness. Do not let your hearts be troubled. My peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. So stay and rest in the love of God, your Creator, of Christ, your risen King, and of the Holy Spirit, your strength